Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read Magic Treehouse number 25, S5 5041, Stage Fright on a Summer Night. Chapter 6 to Chapter 10. On stage, we'll led Jack and Annie through a door into the back of the Globe Theater. Then he led them up a dark stairway. As they headed upstairs, Jack heard laughter coming from the audience. His legs felt like jelly. "This way," said Will. He led Jack and Annie into a crowded, dimly lit room. Actors were rushing about everywhere. Each seemed to be in his own world. One was pulling on a cape. Another was tying a rope around his waist. A third was whispering words to himself. "I'll find your costumes," said Will. As Will dug through a large basket of clothes, Jack and Annie looked around the costume room. It was crammed with fancy gowns, purple and blue capes, gold and silver wigs, stacks of hats and masks. "Cool," whispered Annie. She touched the donkey mask and a lion mask. "These would make good disguises, huh?" Jack was amazed. She was acting so calm. Didn't she know they were about to stand in front of 3,000 people? The thought made him break into a sweat. His stomach felt fluttery. "Here," said Will. He handed them green tunics, hats, and slippers. "Put these on. No time to dally. Your parts come up soon." Jack and Annie slipped behind the curtain and changed into their costumes. As they put on their hats, Annie hid her pigtail. When they came out, Will handed them each a small scroll. "Here are your roles," he said. "They have only your lines on them, no one else's." Jack unrolled his scroll. He had two long speeches to read. "Wait a second," he said. "I thought I just had a few lines. I didn't know I had a ton." "Don't worry," said Will. "Just remember, speak very clearly and with feeling. And above all, act natural." "Act natural?" thought Jack. "How do you act natural when you're about to have a heart attack?" Just then a chubby man burst into the costume room. He had curly hair and bright red cheeks. He was dressed all in green too. "For goodness sakes, Will," he said in a frantic whisper. "What will we do?" "Don't worry, look who I have found. They both can read," said Will. He pushed Jack and Annie forward. "Jack and Andy, meet Puck, merry wanderer of the night. He'll take you to the stage. Good luck." Annie smiled. Jack groaned. "Come, boys," said Puck. "Follow me." Puck led Jack and Annie out of the costume room into the hallway. Then he guided them to a dark area at the back of the stage. Actors stood silently nearby, waiting to go on. One wore a beautiful white gown. Others wore tattered brown rags. Through an arch, Jack saw the roof of the stage. It was blue with stars and a moon. A huge crowd stood directly in front of the stage. More people watched from the galleries above. Every single person in England is out there, Jack thought with horror. How did I let Annie talk me into this? "I'll take you on stage first," Puck whispered to Jack. "When I say her now, spirit, with one that you start reading your lines, understand?" Jack barely nodded. His mouth felt dry. He tried to swallow, but he couldn't. The Puck turned to Annie. "You go on stage with the Fairy Queen," he whispered. He pointed to the actor dressed in the beautiful white gown. "When she tells you to sing her to sleep, you start your song." "What's the tune?" asked Annie. Just make it up. Make it up, said Puck. Now, if they yell rude things, do not stop. Just if who yells rude things, Jack broke in. The groundlings get a bit wild, said Puck. Groundlings, said Jack. The rowdy folk who don't have seats, said Puck. They are standing close to the stage. If they throw rotten fruit, don't stop either. Just keep going. That does it, thought Jack. He couldn't go on stage, not with the groundlings throwing things, not with 3,000 people watching, not with a million lines to read, not when he was about to throw up. While Puck and Annie watched the show, Jack slipped away. He looked for the exit. Just as he found the stairs, he bumped into Will. "Where are you going?" Will whispered. "I can't stay," said Jack. "I'm sick." Will sucked in his breath, but then he put his hands on Jack's shoulders and spoke calmly. "Close your eyes for a moment, Jack," he said. Jack closed his eyes. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. "There is nothing to fear," Will whispered. "Imagine you are a fairy. You are in the forest on a summer night. See the silver moon overhead. Hear the owls. Hoo, hoo." Will's deep whisper seemed to cast a spell over Jack. He felt calmer. He could picture the silver moon. He could hear the hooting of the owls. "Are you in the forest on a summer night?" asked Will. Jack nodded. "If you believe that, the audience will believe it too," whispered Will. "We are on," whispered Puck. The chubby actor ran to Jack. He grabbed his hand and pulled him along. Before he knew it, Jack was on stage. Chapter 7. In the Forest in the Night. Jack stood on stage in the bright sunlight. He felt 3,000 pairs of eyes staring at him. "How now, spirit?" Puck said in a loud voice. "The whither wander you?" Jack looked down at his scroll. He pushed his glasses into place. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. One of the groundlings hissed. "How now, spirit?" Puck shouted even louder this time. "Whither wander you?" Jack closed his eyes. He felt the summer night. He took a deep breath. He cleared his throat. He looked at his speech. Then he began to read. "Over hill, over dale, through brush, through bush, through briar, over park, over pale, through flood, through fire, I do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon's spear, and I serve the fairy queen." As Jack read, the audience grew quiet. Jack forgot he was Jack. He was in the forest in the night, talking to Puck. When he finished, not a single groundling hissed or threw things. Jack took a deep breath as Puck started his line. Jack knew he had one more speech. His heart pounded, but he was more from excitement now than fear. When it was time to start his second speech, he was ready. This time he spoke very clearly and with feeling. He tried to be as natural as possible. When he finished his speech, the audience clapped and clapped. Jack hardly remembered leaving the stage. Will was waiting for him. "Hooray!" said Will, slapping Jack on the back. "You were brilliant." Jack blushed as he gave Will his scroll back. He couldn't believe he had just performed, acted in front of all those people. And he had actually had fun, just like Annie had said. Jack waited in the shadows for Annie to do her part. He watched her go on stage with the fairy queen and the other fairies. When the queen asked the fairies to sing her to sleep, Annie stepped forward. Reading from her scroll, she sang out clearly and with lots of feeling. You spotted snakes with double tongue, a thorny hedgehogs be not seen. And he waved his hand as if shooing away the snakes and hedgehogs. Newts and blind worms do no wrong. Come not near our fairy queen. And he shook a finger at the newts and blind worms. The audience howled with laughter. Annie kept singing. She made the funny movements and silly faces to go with the words. She even added a little dance to her song. By the time she finished, the audience clapped and cheered and stamped their feet. Wonderful job, Andy, was said when Annie left the stage. You were brilliant, Jack told her. Thanks, said Annie. She gave a scroll back to Will. Do I go on again? Not until the end. When we all bow, said Will. Just then Jack heard the audience laughing again. He really wanted to see the play, so he found a shadowy spot at the back of the theater and watched from there. Jack couldn't understand everything people said, but he could understand the story. It was about people in love, but none were able to marry the people they loved. The funniest part was about the fairy king and fairy queen. The king was mad at the queen, so he put magic juice on her eyelids to make her fall in love with the first person she saw. The pug worked for the king. He wanted to make the king's trick even funnier, so he put the head of a donkey on a funny man. When the queen woke up, she saw the donkey man. The magic made her fall madly in love with him. The fairy king finally broke the spell. Puck turned the donkey man back into a human while he slept. When the man woke up, he looked about in wonder. I have had a most rare vision, he said. I have had a dream. Jack whispered the words to himself. I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream. Beside him, a group of actors gathered for the last scene of the play. My lion mask is missing. One of them wailed, I cannot be a lion without my mask. Hush, of course you can, said Will. Just roar and roar again. Will pushed the actor on stage. He wiped his brow, then he caught sight of Jack. Get Andy, he said. It's almost time for a bow. Annie, where is Annie? Jack wondered. He hadn't seen her in a while. He picked into the costume room. She wasn't there. Jack's heart started to pound. He had a scary thought. Oh no, he whispered. Jack ran down the stairs. He opened the door. He was happy to see Annie running out from some trees behind the theater. It's time to bow, he said, grabbing her hand. Where have you been? What did you do? I'll show you later, said Annie. Jack and Annie charged upstairs together. They found Will and some of the actors waiting. The pug was finishing his last speech on stage. So good night unto you all. To give me your hands if we be friends. Andy, Jack, said Will. He grabbed Annie and Jack. The pug ended his speech. The audience gave a big hand. They clapped and whistled and shouted. Jack and Annie ran on stage with Will and the other actors. While the crowd cheered, they all bowed once, twice, and once again. Chapter 8. The most important person. Will stepped forward and held up his hand. Slowly, the crowd quieted down. Thank you all, he said, and thank you to the most important person in all the world. She has graced us with her presence today. Will made a sweeping bow to a woman in a gallery above the stage. The woman wore a white dress with pearls. A veil covered her face. A woman stood up and slowly lifted the veil. She had a pale, wrinkled skin and small dark eyes. She wore a red wig. The audience members let out a gasp. They all fell to their knees. Long live Queen Elizabeth, said Will. Long live Queen Elizabeth, the crowd shouted. Long live Queen Elizabeth, shouted Jack and Annie. The queen smiled. Her teeth were all black. The audience didn't seem to mind. They cheered even louder. The queen raised one hand, and the crowd instantly hushed. I thank you, my good people, she said. I thank all these good players, everyone. Today they gave us a special kind of magic, the magic of theater. They turned the very daytime into night. Oh man, whispered Jack, that was it, the special magic. Their search was over. The audience cheered again. When the actors left the stage, they gathered around Will to congratulate him on his success, and he pulled Jack aside. We found it, she said, the magic. I know, Jack said. Will helped us. Let's thank him. Later, said Annie. First, I have to show you something. I need your help, quick. Annie led Jack downstairs and outside. As people streamed away from the globe, the late afternoon sun was going down. This way, said Annie. She headed for the patch of trees behind the theater. When she and Jack stepped into the gloomy shade, Jack saw an old odd figure near a tree. A purple cape barely covered his furry back. A golden wig and a lion mask barely hid his furry head. Jack gasped. The bear! You stole him! I had to, said Annie. I went to the car when no one was looking. I put a costume on him, so if we passed people on the way here, they would think he was an actor. But you can't just steal him, said Jack. I wasn't stealing. I was just saving, said Annie. I'm not sure what to do with him now. What do you think? Just then the bear's owner charged into the woods. Where's my bear? He shouted. His face was red. He was scowling. Thieves, he yelled. Give him back. I'm selling him to the fight. No, said Annie, standing between the bear and the man. He's a tame bear, not a fighter. She's right, said Jack, jumping in. And besides, bear fighting is stupid, really stupid. "'Tis indeed, said a deep voice. Jack and Annie and the bear's owner whirled around. Will and Puck was standing at the edge of the woods. Chapter 9, Sweet Sorrow. Tut tut, you're a sorry sight, man, Will said to the bear's owner. Trying to sell an old tame bear to the fight? But I've been planning to write a play with a pile for the bear, so take this money for him and be gone. Will handed some gold coin to the bear's owner. The man's eyes grew wide. He laughed. You can have him, the man said, and he took off. Thank you, and good riddance, called Will. Then he turned to Puck. Take out the player to the stable. Tell the actors they needn't be afraid of him. He's tamer than most of them. Most of 'em. Come this way, Puck said. He put his arm around the bear and gently led him out from the trees. You'll love the stage, old man. Bye, Puck. Bye, Dan, said Annie. Puck smiled and waved. The bear stared for a moment at Jack and Annie. He had a grateful look in his eyes. Then he lumbered off with Puck. Thanks, Will, for helping Dan, said Annie, and for helping us. Thank you both for helping me, said Will. You saved the day. The night, you mean, said Jack. Indeed, the night, said Will. Oh, here's your bag. You forgot it. He gave Jack his leather bag. Then he held up the two scrolls with their lines on them. And you can take these, said Will. He handed them to Jack, and Jack put them in his bag. Where are you off to now? Said Will. The other side of London Bridge, said Annie. And I can take you there in my boat, said Will. Follow me. Will led them along a dusty path toward the river. The last rays of the sun slanted through the trees. Soon they came to a small rowboat, docked on the Thames. Climb in, said Will. Jack and Annie and Will climbed in. Will untied the boat from the dock. Then he began rowing across the river. The water reflected the purple and pink in the sky. Only a few white swans now glided over the shimmering ripples. The river smelled as bad as before, but Jack didn't mind now. He had grown used to it. Jack pulled out his notebook and pencil. "What are you doing?" Will asked. I wanted to write some of my memories in my notebook, said Jack. Aha, and I'll note you both in my book of memories, said Will. Jack smiled. I have a question, Will, said Annie. Why does Queen Elizabeth have black teeth? Too much sugar, said Will. I hope it doesn't make her feel bad looking that way, I mean, said Annie. Oh no, she's not the least hurt, said Will. The Queen has no idea how she looks. She hasn't picked in a good mirror for 20 years. Is that true? Said Annie. She is, said Will. The Queen pretends to be young and beautiful, just as you pretended to be a boy, and the bear pretended to be an actor. You see, all the world is a stage. Jack liked that idea. He wrote in his notebook, all the world is a stage. Jack looked up at London Bridge as they passed by. The shops on the bridge were closed now. The theater crowd was thinning out. The scaredy black birds were no longer on the rooftops. They had swooped down and were picking at the garbage left on the cobblestone. The show was over. By the time they came to the river bank, night was falling. It was much cooler. Will tied up his rowboat and climbed ashore with Jack and Annie. Thanks a lot, Jack said to Will. We can go the rest of the way by ourselves. Where do you live? Said Will. In Frog Creek, said Annie. What path do you take? Asked Will. You'll never believe this, said Annie. We climb up the rope ladder to a tree house in that tree over there. And we open a book. Then we make a wish, said Jack, and we go to the place in the book. Will smiled. Thy life is a miracle, isn't it? He said. Yes, indeed, said Annie. Jack nodded. He liked the way Will looked at things. I have an idea, said Will. Why don't you both stay here instead? You can live and act at the Globe Theatre. I'll ask the Queen to exclude you from the law about girls going on stage, Annie, because of your great talent. And I will teach you both to write plays. Really? Said Jack and Annie together. Jack couldn't imagine anything more fun than he thought of his parents back in Frog Creek. But our mom and dad, he said. We'd really miss them, said Annie. Well, smile. I understand, he said. And I would miss you if I were them. He put his hand over his heart. So good night. Good night. Parting is such a sweet sorrow. Yes, yes it is, said Annie, nodding. Farewell, said Will. He waved. Jack and Annie waved back. Then Will turned on his heels and headed back to his rowboat. Jack and Annie walked to the rope ladder and climbed up to the treehouse. When they got inside, they looked out the window. Will was rowing back across the Thames River. A single white swan glided across the ripples beside his boat. A silver moon was rising in the sky. At that moment, Jack did feel sweet sorrow. He wanted to stay in merry old England just a little longer. Wait, Will, he shouted, but Annie picked up the Pennsylvania book. I wish we could go home, she said. Wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 10. Our Will. Jack opened his eyes. They were wearing their own clothes again. A lightning bug that blinked inside the growing darkness of the treehouse. And he picked up Morgan's note. She repeated the rhyme. To find the special magic, you must step into the light. And without one, the spell or charm, turn daytime into night. We found the special magic, said Annie. Theater magic. Yep, said Jack. He opened his backpack. He and Annie took out the two scrolls Will had given them. When they unrolled them, Jack saw that Will had written something. He read aloud. Thank you, boss, for helping me. Your friend, William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare? Said Annie. I have heard that name before. Me too, said Jack. He took out the research book. He looked up Shakespeare in the index. He turned to a page and read aloud. William Shakespeare lived from 1564 to 1616. He wrote 37 plays and many sonnets and other poems. Many people think he was the greatest writer who ever lived. The greatest? Said Anne. Our Will? Oh man, whispered Jack. He stared in amazement at William Shakespeare's autograph. Hey, we can leave our scrolls with Morgan's note, said Annie. It'll prove to her we found the special magic. They put their two scrolls next to the note on the floor. Then they climbed down the rope ladder. When they started walking through the woods, a breeze blew, shaking the tree leaves. Shadows shifted. The birds called from hidden places. Remember the enchanted wood, Annie said in a hushed voice. The fairy queen and the fairy king. Fairy king. Jack smiled and nodded. And Pa, the merry wanderer of the night, said Annie. And Will, our Will. Jack nodded again. I had a great time, said Annie. Didn't you? Jack sighed. Yes, he said. Then he took a deep breath and spoke very clearly and with feeling. I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream. The end.